Okay, I'm just going to admit this up front. I mess up. Quite a bit, actually. For example, this interview that I did with Brian was recorded twice because I somehow messed up simply recording the interview and had to redo it twice. I'm also often pretty intensely annoyed with things from time to time. I get angry, sad, disappointed, disillusioned, and in many cases, I like to talk about these types of things. In my experience as a woman of color, people don't pull many punches with me, so I had been conditioned to feel like that's how the world worked, until one day I stopped pulling punches. And then I found myself alone. Alone because of my sarcasm, my honesty, my assertion, my sometimes harsh stating of the truth. I began to learn nuances to that, though. It started with different ways to tell the truth. But then, sometimes it can turn out that many of those nuances can lead you into delusions and sometimes even full-blown falsehoods. I'm talking about this because this episode is the reason that I wanted to start the podcast in the first place. I felt like we've been pushed this narrative of positivity and making it a requirement for all people, and especially artists. For artists, what we do and who we are becomes our brand, and we've been told that nobody wants you if you're whining or complaining or upset or angry. Yeah, sure, the work can come from someplace dark, but for God's sakes, don't make it who you are. Because no one wants to hear anything less than positivity. And that's where I got the idea for this podcast. My core thought was that I wanted to give artists a safe platform to be legitimately tired of the bullshit and just wanted to express their take on it. When we work alone or primarily by ourselves, we don't have co-workers to team up with, much less an HR department to report to. We can't ask ourselves for a raise to make it worth it. We are constantly trying to work and rework what we are doing while also trying to stay in line with who we are. Brian Piña has been going through a transitional period in which he has recently let his audience see him in an entirely different light, and truthfully, that light is not the most flattering, but it has helped him join who he is on stage, in his music, with who he is inside. And I know that seems like a generic concept, but as we have gotten older, we have all figured out that more often than not, things are not what they seem. But Brian and many new artists are trying to create art and music that is perfectly in tune with exactly who they are. I'm Amanda Levy, and this is Artist Gripes. So we're going to start off with how I reached out to you for the episode, and the reason I reached out to you was because I saw something on Facebook that was very contrary to what I knew you as on social media. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Again.
I had... So it starts off with this year, I spent the most time I think I've ever really spent, just like really focusing and dedicating on being a musician and being an artist and being known as both of those things synonymously. Mm-hmm. And in that time I had these interactions with people that it gave me the vibe like something was missing, like there was a disconnect happening between who I knew I was on the day-to-day and who I was being perceived as. Mm-hmm. But at first it's just anxiety, so I was like, I can't prove any of this. Mm-hmm. And as I had more and more interactions with just like new people that I was meeting and stuff, I started to wonder if I was just being anxious, and I took a step back and I looked at the one thing that a lot of people kind of met and knew me through, mm-hmm. And that was my social media, because there was especially like the last couple of years, once I started actually like doing anything at all art-wise, I met a lot of people through that, and that's mm-hmm. how a lot of people kind of know me and understand me, is through like Facebook and
that's how
Instagram.
I know you. Yeah.
It turns out we've been friends for 2 years.
Yes,
like, wait, what?
Yeah, we have been.
So,
yes, we are actually friends through a mutual friend, through Max Feinstein specifically.
Yeah.
Is how
love him.
Allegedly I believe that we met. at least once, but
I'm not even sure we did, to be honest.
I have no idea. But I know that our biggest, strongest common thread was Max.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
We must be good peoples.
Apparently. We do like each other. So Feinstein is one of my favorite musicians in the scene.
Oh.
But yeah, so I took a step back and I looked at all of my stuff that people had known me through, and I was like, I don't think that none of this accurately represents what's happening in my brain and what's been happening, but it wasn't necessarily their fault that they had this perception of me as being someone who, I don't know, I guess like someone who just like did it for fun to an extent, and that there wasn't a certain set of layers to the expression that I was doing, and a certain personal fulfillment out of it. Some of this came through, like some of the idea that there was this misperception came through when I had interactions with people. I've been told by those people that A, I was like a fuckboy, right, or B, it was just like the way that there was one person in particular, like the way they treated me was as if I didn't have the nuances I knew I did. And that's just putting it mildly. To put it more like brutally, like they were pretty dismissive of things that I understood to be like valid representations of who I am that were serious. And from there, I realized, okay, well, this is why. I mean, look at the way I look on this. And versus the material in my upcoming EP, which is almost exclusively about pretty dark things, that, things that I've never actually implemented in my songwriting before either, at least like done so publicly. Most of my songwriting before this EP is like kind of like fun, mostly. Like that was like the aim, was just high energy excitement thing, and just very performative, but there wasn't much of a layer to it message wise. So once I realized that, I was like, this is the disconnect that I've been perceiving the whole time. And so I made this post just detailing that there is a suicidality there, and it's never been totally comfortable for me to be like 100% like overt, and to go into much detail, especially online. But I wanted to say something, because like in my brain, I had been struggling with this, and I continue to do so every day. And yet people really didn't think that was there at all.
No, I didn't. And I know that I didn't. I was always like, oh, he's a musician. Yeah, he's pretty positive.
Happy-go-lucky.
Yeah.
He randomly takes his shirt off on stage, and it's like...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that part. But I do know that I knew you as a musician. And I did know you as, like, somebody that was in the community, very, like, light and lovey, kind of.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And there are tons of people like that.
Sure.
And for most of them, for a lot of them, I'm like, all right. I mean, that's kind of a gimmick, but that's okay. So, I mean, especially when they're so nice. But yeah, I would have never thought. I didn't expect to see that post at all. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah,
this is real.
The response on it made it very clear, because it was, I had an outpouring that wasn't just surface level. It was a lot of people that were messaging me, and a lot of people that were kind of surprised by it. And I'm like, they're surprised. Like, I've been like struggling with this since I was like 10. And the suicidality was a factor probably since I was like 11.
Yeah.
Like, it's been around for a long, long time. And of course, as you become an adult, I mean, you get more responsibilities, the pressure's there, and it just becomes more intense. Like, to think that these people had been seeing me, and they hadn't been seeing this part of me that's constantly there every day, and then starting to exist in my lyrics, and they couldn't see that either. That's where I think I had to draw the line, because it was like, I'm actually expressing this, and no one sees it. And it's very, I don't know how to put it. Like, if I was an artist that came fresh onto the scene with this as part of my image, I think then at least people might understand that layer is there when I'm performing live, and they'll hear the lyrics, or they'll hear a certain way the song's being played. And it just bothered me that there is a very real, very strong messaging going on that people literally don't see just because of the perception I put out there, even though it is there.
Yeah.
So.
You specifically talked about having this issue since, I mean, a lot of people have this later on in life, but I feel like 10 is a really early time to know about, or at least be aware of this kind of stuff, right? So, do you think that you were hiding that really well, or do you think that you were just coping really well? I mean, or did you just not talk about it really? So that's why.
When?
I mean, to fellow musicians.
Okay.
Like when you decided, like, I'm going to become a musician, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to play, this is, what my music is about. What do you think that people were missing other than the fact that you were, like, smiling through it? I mean, yeah, there's got to be something else, yes?
Yeah, and so I think it starts with the community problem, where it's like, if you're a musician and you don't have much access quite yet to networks outside of your, like, 3-mile radius, let's say, you're going to exist under this impression that you have to play a certain way, or like express yourself a certain way just so that people even pay attention. And so, at least within, like, Newark and in Montclair, there isn't a strong, like, just singer-songwriter scene necessarily. It exists, but it's not anywhere near as potent as it is in Jersey City, Hoboken, or in the city. So being a solo performer, and as just somebody who just, like, loves being on stage, I emphasized heavily on kind of, like, stage antics and, like, these kind of bolsterous songs that didn't have much meaning tethered to, like, my own struggles. Because in this area, people probably wouldn't even hear those lyrics anyways. They wouldn't really pay attention. And what options we do have as a singer-songwriter in, like, Newark, for example, they're like, they're not venues that are listening spaces. So even though I thought my lyrics were okay, they were never, like, deeply, like, entrenched in who I was emotionally.
Okay.
But it kind of hit me when I had started to move a bit more eastward, and I started seeing, like, singer-songwriters doing a great job, and I started seeing them spring about, like, artists like Danny May, who writes, like, really strange and, like, theatrical lyrics, or Rory DeLasno, and, like, his, like, very emotional and potent lyrics. And I just started seeing, like, oh, like, it's a matter of, like, tackling your own honesty and, like, who you are as a person. And that's how you really get the most as a singer-songwriter. And so that's when I knew I had to marry the two, and that's where Pines comes in. And that was a project that was a performance art. Like, I didn't know what it was going to be at first, but I knew that it had to be, I wanted to do something very strange. And I was still living within the context of, like, playing in loud bars that weren't going to listen, so I needed, like, to pop on stage really hard. And that was the first time when I started to mine my own, like, depression and suicidality for material in some way, shape, or form.
And you did that at QXTs, yeah?
I did that. No, I never did it at Q's. I was planning to, but it never worked out.
Okay, sorry.
I did Pines twice at Clash Bar in Clifton.
Oh, okay.
And then once at Club Rock in Boone.
Okay.
Yeah. And there I had to, because it was it was essentially just a play. I had to script something, and I wanted it to be honest, so I had to constantly reflect on what it was I was saying. And in particular, I had to care emotionally about it, because I knew the whole thing I was doing was so subversive and weird. It was set up to be like, it was set up to almost play on the idea of a 3-song set, and kind of mislead the audience into thinking that that's what's going to happen. And then, all of a sudden there's narrative happening, and then there's, like, a little bit of props, and then there's, like, just me just being weird, essentially, and like kind of like purposely weirding people out as I start to twist what it was that I was doing on stage. And it started to morph more into like a small play right before the audience's eyes. And in order for me to even pull that off while dealing with the awkwardness and like the pressure of like that kind of subversion and the audience not knowing what's happening anymore, I had to really care about what it was I was saying. Mm-hmm. That came to a head at the Club Rock show in Booton, where people, I don't want to say people, I can only say definitively one person exclaimed very loudly during the set how much they didn't want me to be doing this.
Oh no.
Yeah, like I was legit heckled.
Aww.
And while they were the loudest person, I suspect that there was at least a few people in the audience that just straight up didn't want any part of what was happening.
Oh wow.
Even though, and this is through some of the darker moments in Pines, like Pines was like essentially like it was a play, and there was some script, some verbiage for me, but like it was also stamped by a series of like stunts. Mm-hmm. And one of them was the microphone coil around the neck, and then I would sing. And it was obviously symbolic of like suicide. Mm-hmm. But even as I was doing that, the lady was like, "Oh, I'm so over you."
Oh my god!
Right. And this is
Jesus Christ.
Right. And it was very clear by what I was saying at that point that that's what was happening. Mm-hmm. But like in order for me to persist through that, mm-hmm. I had to make sure that this was deeply entrenched in who I was emotionally, mm-hmm. because then I'm not pulling myself through it. Then I'm just going to break out of it. You know, I'm not going to give a shit, or I'm not going to be as determined. And that's when it dawned on me that I had to be more honest in my songwriting, because the music that I used for Pines, while it was my own, mm-hmm. it was just like hashed up songs that like didn't have to do with the subject matter that well. Okay. Because I'd never actually had to write about myself in that way. Mm-hmm. And that's what especially if you look at my Instagram, that's why it transitions from Pines into like a kind of dedicated, that's like singer-songwriter aesthetic. Yeah. Because then I realized, like, okay, this is what I've been missing. This is the thing that like hasn't been around for me, and why people almost don't even perceive me, at least or didn't at the time, as like a singer-songwriter as much as just like a performer. Because I wasn't able to marry the two in the music itself, and I never had like a place to do that, or a proper scene that had the listening spaces, so that when I wrote the lyrics or I wrote quieter music, mm-hmm. people can actually hear what's happening and hear the depth and the nuance.
Yeah. So I can't believe that lady did that.
It was intense.
That is intense. That's crazy.
It's a good experience. Everyone needs to get shit on like that. Everyone needs it.
So, yeah, what I wanted to talk about was like the transition in which your depression and your suicidal thoughts went from being like an obstacle mm-hmm. for you and your work mm-hmm. To being an actual tool. Because I do remember you being like, definitively being like, it's a tool, it helps now. But I can't remember. Do you remember the transition that you had specifically? From when it went from being like completely fucking unhelpful to like, I could fucking use this shit or something.
I think it was, so that particular time period was 2012 to 2013. And in that time, it was certainly a huge crippling thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think it became a tool up until, I want to say like 2015, when I was crushed by someone who had said something to me, like someone that I cared about, that had said something to me that echoed back to like the way I was bullied a lot between like throughout elementary school and high school as a smaller boy in particular. It was someone that I cared about, and we shared like a relationship that like definitely crossed and blurred the platonic romantic lines. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of the situations where I was confused about what it was between us. And she had admitted, and we had this for like, I think 6 months. We were like heavy with basically just like hanging out with each other. And had all the tidings of like a proper relationship, or so I thought at the time, like, where we were hitting each other up every day. We were each other's like security, and we were heavy petting and making out. We never we never exceeded past that. Called each other soulmates.
Oh,
yeah, it was very heavy. It was very intense, and a lot of that was just based on how we both had these crazy mental illness breaks in that year at the same time. So we were like, we were very dependent or codependent on each other. And when it came down to be like, well, what are we? And she admitted that she couldn't commit fully to me because I was just like too skinny.
Oh,
right. And so that right then and there, it harkened back to all this stuff where, growing up, I wasn't ever like that masculine as a boy to begin with. And it definitely hurt at the time. But it started becoming like a source of motivation. So that's when I started like working out more for the first time. I was like overcompensating. And that working out gave me like a sort of like confidence to just try new things, because that intrinsically was a new thing. I was reaching like a new weight that I'd never been at before. There was a perception of me that had never existed before, where at the time, and I didn't realize it at the time, I was being looked at as like a masculine, like straight dude. And like before, it was never really like that. I think now, for the last 3 years especially, people have had that kind of idea of me, but that's never been in my brain up until like 2015.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, leading up all the way till then, I was just like this really teeny, kind of like effeminate, like nerdy kid. And that's when the depression had twisted into a tool. But it still never... I still didn't know myself very well. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never fully explored all my traumas. That was just like the start of me realizing what traumas I had gone through.
Oh, okay. I
never really had like full confrontations with them emotionally like that, because I just hadn't been through enough experiences to understand that. And I started going into poetry, and that's how that started happening, and that's when I started like adding a lot of people on Facebook, and that's when like the perception of me kind of began, at least in the scene as an artist. And then I would slowly start to work that into like music again, and trying to do that. And even though it was like crippling and nervous, I remember in late 2015 I was at this like little cafe open mic. The cafe's not around anymore. It's called Mara's, and I was just nervous. I was so nervous. But the only reason why I pushed myself to do it is because I pushed myself into exercising, because I was so traumatized by that. And only after Pines, which in and of itself had several traumatizing experiences, including the lady freaking out, including doing Pines at that venue when that venue was way more singer-songwriter venue, so it was like an inherent risk to my reputation.
Oh, okay.
Doing that, being on stage and doing all this writing was constantly triggering me all the time. Like, I was constantly thinking about suicide for the purposes of like storytelling. And I just had to be in a dark place all the time for like 6 months. And the thing is that for a lot of people, they'll find respite in picking up their phones, and in that time they're not dealing with that. But because of the way I had weaved the social media into the narrative of the act, that wasn't respite either. So when I picked up my phone, I would make some kind of Instagram post or Facebook post that was directly a part of the storytelling. So I almost never got to escape that side of me. And it just kind of reminded me how entwined suicidality had always been, and depression had always been. But it really became I think now I use it more effectively than I've ever used it, because it wasn't. Now I use it to tell perspectives and reflections, as opposed to just straight up say, that I'm depressed. It's used as a way to bounce off other themes and ideas about myself nowadays, which is, I think, much more nuanced than the Pines days, where it was just straight up like, here's a microphone cable, isn't this obvious? Or, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
isn't this obvious?
Yeah, come on, like, it's blood capsule, get it dying, like, now it's like, it's just little decisions here and there musically, little decisions here and there visually, and they're all used to create a greater tapestry of myself.
Do you think that now that you're harnessing this better, people are understanding or receiving you or perceiving you more authentically as a person and an artist, or at least bridging the gap between the two? Or
I feel like the gap is definitely bridged. It's uncomfortable because it's like, especially after that post, there were people who really didn't. Again, there were people who didn't know that about me, and like I can kind of see it in their eyes now when I say hi to them and stuff. But
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I've never seen it as a bad thing. I see it as kind of strange, I guess, but only for me, because I've never, I was never so out about that stuff. I see it as strange because it is strange to have to interact and network with people, but know simultaneously that you have so deeply entwined your public reputation out with this, because your music is going to be surrounding this. Yeah, that they're going to say hi to you and have these interactions with that in mind now. And that's just how it is. I don't think that's been a hindrance at all. Like, I don't think anyone's ever been extra nice because of it or something like that. Okay. But it is definitely weird to do it. It's weird to like network and go through the graceful motions and etiquette of like talking to people, knowing that they know that that's a part of who you are now.
Does it feel better that who you are and like who you're putting yourself out to be as an artist are more intertwined, or is there a piece of you that's thinking about wanting to? I don't know how private a person you are. I mean, I guess I technically know how private a person you are because you didn't really fucking say anything until very recently. Yeah. But do you feel freed from secrets, or are you the kind of person that's going to be like, oh, I just want some secrets. I wish I had some secrets now, and I don't have any secrets. Or you probably do, and you're not going to tell us. So
I feel freed. I feel pretty damn free. Okay. Because there was a strange pressure, and I think my ex saw a lot of it because they were around and there day to day during Pines. There was a strange pressure that I had placed on myself to maintain the civility that you saw, the kind of like positivity that you saw, and I don't know where that came from necessarily. And that pressure did a lot more damage than it helped ultimately. Yeah. And ever since I was a kid, I always felt like there was a distance between me and other people anyway. So it was like that didn't help that I would act like that, and it makes the song. It's made the songwriting feel more like there's a ghost in the room. You know what I mean? Like every musician, every artist has experienced that, where like they've either seen someone or been that performer where you're playing and like it's like ethereal and magical, and like something is happening through you at this point now, and there's just the silence to the room, and there's a certain depth to what's happening when you're playing. And I think I've more immediately and consistently achieved that once I was honest. I had that at the Pet Shop show for a moment too, where I played a song in particular called Let Me In. It's just like, it's blatantly about suicide. I never actually say the word, but it's so obvious. And it's when I had that experience, every performer knows that silence. Every single one. It's the greatest silence on the planet, where it's like, it's so deep, it's so textured. People are like waiting for what's happening next. People are paying attention. You know that they are listening for every little echo that you're putting out there into the room. And that only happened when I played this song. That's not true. That it never happened so deeply until I played that song. Following the post, it happened more consistently. It felt more like there was something I was channeling and less like I was playing. Like it was something that a sort of mission that I was achieving while being on stage. And that's the thing that became clear to me, was that I am a voice for people who have anxiety and who have self-esteem issues, who have gender dysphoria or are depressed or suicidal. I am what happens if you're just strong enough to be all those things and still express who you are anyway. You know, and I think I'd always been like that, but since I never married the two, no one really knew. And having since done that, the music's only gotten stronger as a result. The songwriting has gotten more potent, and I know that through like significant feedback from people who themselves are great performers and songwriters. So.
Yeah. I think you just did the takeaway, so I think we're done. I was like, oh shit, is it happening right now? I think he's doing the takeaway right now. Oh my god, there it is. There it is. You always end on a really good note. It's like crazy.
Thank you so much for listening to Artist Gripes. Thank you, Brian Piña, for the awesome interview. Brian is working on his EP, which will be dropping this summer, so stay on the lookout for it. As always, this podcast is a No Peeking production with pre-show and post-show written by me, Amanda, and the theme song was composed by Julian Gordon. Here's a small additional shameless plug. No Peeking Theater has only 9 more days of the Indiegogo campaign to bring a show to Los Angeles for the first time. So if you enjoyed this podcast or know who No Peeking is or just want to support small or local artists, donate to the campaign. The link is in the bio. Bye!
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.